Hollywood was the dream factory, but behind the glamour were 17 secret rules that dictated every star's life. 3 of those rules didn't just hurt careers, they ended them forever. The morality clause, when public decorum was law. The screen is a fairyland. When the studio gates closed, Hollywood stars were often forced to live a lie. But no contract clause held more power over their private lives than the seemingly benign morality clause, which turned every star into a 24/7 ambassador of virtue. For the public, figures like the charming Lana Turner, the dashing Gary Cooper, and the ever-virtuous Shirley Temple were idealized paragons of grace and goodness. They existed on a pedestal, built not of granite, but of contract paper. The morality clause, standard in every contract from the 1930s onward, stipulated that an actor could be suspended, fined, or outright fired for any conduct that brought public disgrace or ridicule upon themselves or the studio. This vague language was not a legal oversight, it was a secret weapon, granting studio executives absolute authority to dictate a star's behavior off-screen. The actress Ingrid Bergman, celebrated for her angelic screen image, faced a public relations catastrophe when her private choices conflicted with the wholesome image the studio had manufactured. The resulting public fury demonstrated the clause's power over public reception. It was a constant, ever-present threat. For the stars, it meant living in perpetual fear that a private indiscretion could instantaneously halt their soaring career. The studios, having invested millions in crafting a flawless image, protected that investment ruthlessly. This was especially true for the female stars, whose meticulously tailored images made them highly vulnerable to accusations of impropriety. Studio heads employed entire departments dedicated to surveillance and fixing. These fixers worked to ensure any potential scandal was stopped before it ever reached the press. The studios could force stars to end relationships, enter into sham marriages, or even leave the country until a scandal had passed from the headlines. The contract itself essentially sold a star's moral autonomy. They couldn't choose their friends or private companions without the shadow of the studio's disapproval. This enforced adherence to an impossible moral standard created immense psychological strain. It turned ordinary human struggles into matters of corporate policy, punishable by the loss of one's livelihood. The most profound effect was the suppression of the star's genuine self, replaced by a sanitized persona deemed profitable and safe for public consumption. The morality clause ensured that while a star was earning millions for the studio, their salary could be halted without warning. The star's entire career was leveraged against their ability to maintain an image of perfect, unattainable virtue. The morality clause may have been the most potent weapon in the studio's arsenal, but it was just one of many invisible chains used to bind their most valuable assets. Next, we uncover the brutal rule of physical transformation, where a star's true name and very appearance were decided not by choice, but by the business of selling fantasy. The hair color dictate: blonde, brunette, and business. Blondes have more fun. Before she was the platinum bombshell who conquered the screen, Jean Harlow was a forgettable brunette named Harleen Carpenter. Her success began not with a great script, but with a bottle of peroxide and a non-negotiable studio memo. In the meticulously crafted world of old Hollywood, a star's appearance was a carefully calculated business decision, and nowhere was this more evident than in the hair color dictate. Studios demanded radical transformations, convinced that a particular shade or style would unlock a star's box office potential. The natural hair color an actor arrived with was merely a starting point, a canvas awaiting the studio's brush. Then there was Lana Turner, whose journey from a 17-year-old discovered in a malt shop involved a similar, calculated shift. Her naturally dark hair was famously lightened to a bright blonde, enhancing her image as the glamorous sweater girl. This wasn't about vanity, it was about branding. Each strand of hair was designed to fit a specific public fantasy. But the studio demanded one actress make a sacrifice so drastic she permanently harmed her own physical health just to look like a Hollywood siren. Take Rita Hayworth, for example, born Margarita Carmen Cancino. Her Spanish heritage was deemed too ethnic for the mainstream American audience of the 1940s. Columbia Pictures' powerful head, Harry Cohn, saw a different vision. He insisted on a dramatic transformation. Her dark, flowing locks were dyed fiery red, and this change, coupled with a grueling regimen of electrolysis to raise her hairline, was not optional. It was a condition of her ascent to superstardom, a sacrifice of her natural self for the constructed image of a Hollywood goddess. For these women, their hair became a symbol of their studio ownership. Contracts explicitly stated that an actress could not alter her hair color or style without studio approval. Regular appointments with studio hairdressers were mandatory. This constant monitoring extended beyond the set. The psychological impact of such control cannot be overstated. Imagine being told that your natural beauty was insufficient, that a manufactured hue was paramount to your success. It created a profound disconnect between the person and the persona. Ultimately, the hair color dictate was a powerful testament to the studio system's belief that every detail, no matter how personal, could be harnessed and manipulated for profit. It was a rule that dictated not just appearances, but destinies. The control over physical appearance didn't stop at hair color. The studios also believed a star's given name could be a liability, demanding a new identity to match their manufactured image. Next, we unveil the dramatic stories behind the names that never were, and the stars who were forced to become someone else entirely. The name eradication, changing the sound of stardom. I'm Cary Grant, and I've got a job to do. The man who became Cary Grant was once Archibald Leach, and Lucille Lesueur was transformed into Joan Crawford. For countless stars, their first act of surrender to the Hollywood machine was giving up the very name their mothers gave them, traded for a title the public could easily pronounce and, more importantly, market. The name eradication was not merely a cosmetic change, it was a profound ritual of baptism into Hollywood royalty. If a name sounded too foreign, too common, or simply lacked the necessary dramatic flair, it was deemed a liability. Studio executives would sift through lists, testing names for box office resonance, often without the consent of the actor concerned. For the actors, this process could be deeply unsettling. Archibald Leach felt the loss of his name profoundly, often speaking of the disconnect between the real man and the manufactured Cary Grant persona. The name he was given symbolized his past. Trading it for a studio-approved brand meant accepting that his life was now defined by the character on the screen, not the human being off it. However, the name change for other stars was an act of cultural erasure. For one legendary beauty, the studio demanded she eliminate every trace of her Hispanic heritage to become the American goddess they required. Consider the journey of Margarita Carmen Cancino. Her Hispanic heritage was viewed by the studio as limiting to her appeal. She was initially renamed Rita Cancino, then finally bestowed with the elegant Anglo-sounding moniker Rita Hayworth. This renaming, coupled with the hair dye, effectively erased her original cultural identity, creating the new American goddess the studio desired. This transformation was a clear reflection of the prevailing sentiment that marketability trumped authenticity. Then there was the handsome young Rock Hudson, originally named Roy Harold Scherer Jr. His given name was considered entirely too ordinary. Studio publicist Henry Wilson famously paired the rugged stillness of Rock with the grandeur of the Hudson River, forging a new name as imposing and enduring as the land itself. The man known as Roy vanished, replaced by a mythic figure whose name promised both strength and romance. The psychological exchange was simple. Give up your name, and we will give you fame. For many struggling young hopefuls, This was a bargain they could not refuse. The elimination of their birth name was a sign of devotion, but it also meant that they were forever beholden to the character the studio had created, a character whose name was owned, patented, and controlled by the very people who held their future in their hands. The erasure of identity was a powerful tool, ensuring that the star's personal life could never quite catch up to the myth of their public persona. Yet, as invasive as this rule was, the studio's control extended even further into the star's private world, dictating not just their name, but the very shape and appearance of their family life. Next, we unveil the extraordinary lengths studios went to in order to keep the public from discovering that their favorite actress was expecting a child. The No Pregnancy Pact, hiding babies in plain sight. If you want to know about a woman, don't ask her hairdresser. In the golden age, a pregnant star meant lost production time, unmarketable curves, and an image too domestic for public fantasy. For actresses like Loretta Young, concealing a pregnancy became a secret studio-led plot worthy of its own Oscar. The unwritten rule of the No Pregnancy Pact was one of the cruelest demands placed upon Hollywood's leading ladies. The studios invested astronomical sums in projecting their stars as eternally available, or at least unencumbered by the domestic realities of raising a family. When a star became pregnant, it was seen as a catastrophe, a threat to the fantasy they sold. The solution was an elaborate, industry-wide deception that required the actress to essentially vanish from public life. The most famous and heartbreaking example of this was the case of Loretta Young. Beloved for her flawless grace, Young was a devout Catholic who, in the mid-1930s, found herself expecting a child from a complex, non-marital relationship with actor Clark Gable. At the time, such a circumstance would have instantly shattered her virtuous image and violated her contract's morality clause, resulting in the abrupt end of her celebrated career. The studio, in conjunction with Young, engineered a spectacular public ruse. Young announced she was suffering from a mysterious ailment and would take a protracted European vacation. During this supposed retreat, she privately gave birth to her daughter Judy. The secrecy was so absolute that it didn't just end with the birth. This actress was forced to commit to a public lie that would remain the truth for nearly 50 years. Upon her return to Hollywood, the infant remained hidden for a period, only to be introduced later as an adopted child found in an orphanage, a carefully managed narrative that the public and much of the press readily accepted. This level of mandated secrecy required immense resources. For stars who needed to continue filming, costumers worked tirelessly to design wardrobes that concealed their changing shape. Every camera angle was meticulously planned to prevent any visible evidence from reaching the screen. The financial imperative was absolute. The star must not appear to be a mother while under contract. The physical and emotional toll this deception placed on the actresses was profound. They were forced to maintain a public falsehood for years, depriving them of the simple joy of introducing their child openly and honestly. The actress Joan Crawford, who later adopted, was one of many who expressed the enormous pressure on women in the industry to remain unattached and available. This enforced sterility in their public lives was a calculated strategy to maintain the illusion of cinematic fantasy over human reality. This rule revealed the ultimate control the studios held. They dictated not just the star's appearance and name, but the very shape and definition of her private family. The studio's obsession with a star's wholesome public image led to other, equally manipulative arrangements. Next, we uncover the shocking practice of the mandatory mate, where stars were literally ordered to date and even marry partners chosen entirely by the publicity department. The mandatory mate, staged dating, and studio wives. Love is the only game that is not called an account of darkness. Hollywood wasn't just about filmmaking, it was about manufactured chemistry. To quell rumors or to enhance their public images, stars were frequently ordered to date, marry, and pose with partners chosen not by their hearts, but by the studio publicity department. This was the strange contractual demand of the mandatory mate, a fundamental tool of illusion in the Golden Age. For the studios, a star's romantic life was simply another extension of their marketing campaign, meant to align perfectly with the characters they portrayed on screen. If a star played a dashing romantic lead like Tyrone Power, the public expected to see him dating an equally glamorous screen siren. If a female star, like Lana Turner, needed to maintain a fresh, perpetually available image, the studio ensured her public escorts were temporary and impeccably chosen. Other stars, such as Judy Garland, also found their personal relationships dictated by the studio's need for control. Even when romantic pairings developed naturally, the studios often stepped in to manage the perception, ensuring the narrative was always wholesome and suitable for fan magazines. Their relationships became less about private affection and more about public performance. But the darkest side of this rule was reserved for the stars whose private romantic inclinations were considered a liability. For them, the mandatory mate was a prison sentence disguised as a wedding. The practice reached its zenith with the management of stars whose private romantic inclinations did not align with the public's expectations of heteronormativity. To protect these financially valuable assets, publicists would orchestrate elaborate beard relationships, inventing liaisons with members of the opposite gender to create an acceptable public facade. These were often meticulously documented through staged dates at popular nightclubs, mandatory appearances at premieres, and carefully choreographed photographs released to fan magazines. One of the most widely documented cases involved the handsome and hugely popular actor Rock Hudson, whose personal life was closely managed by his agent, Henry Wilson. To silence persistent rumors, Hudson was strategically paired with various starlets and most notably was pressured into a surprise marriage to Wilson's secretary, Phyllis Gates. The arrangement was a publicist's dream, a picture-perfect couple confirming the star's straight image, but a private heartache for all involved, as it forced a talented man to deny his true identity for the sake of his career. The contract ensured that the partner, even if genuine, understood the rules of the game. They were part of the star's carefully managed image. This system effectively placed a velvet rope around the hearts of Hollywood's elite. They were expected to act their roles even when the cameras stopped rolling, sacrificing personal fulfillment for contractual compliance. The emotional consequence was devastating, fostering a culture of profound isolation where true intimacy was nearly impossible amidst the constant surveillance. This rule shows the darkest side of Hollywood image control. Which secret rule so far is the most shocking to you? Let us know in the comments below. While studios manipulated who stars loved, they were equally obsessive about how they looked. Our next chapter delves into the strict, unforgiving rules of the Weight Watch, where a few pounds could lead to the immediate suspension of a legendary career. The Weight Watch, the tyranny of the studio scale. I'm a tough broad from Brooklyn. I can take it. For actresses and actors alike, the weight they saw on the studio scale was often the difference between a new contract and a suspension notice. The pressure was intense, leading to extreme dietary practices, pills, and the constant fear of being deemed too heavy for the camera's cruel eye. The Weight Watch, the tyranny of the studio scale, was an unyielding rule of the Golden Age, a form of artistic control disguised as health management. For stars like Elizabeth Taylor, Ava Gardner, and Marilyn Monroe, their carefully cultivated glamour was deemed fragile, dependent entirely on maintaining a precise, often impossibly slim physique. Studios viewed their stars' bodies as valuable pieces of property, and any deviation from the optimal shape was seen as fiscal irresponsibility. The process was systematic and humiliating. Stars often faced mandatory weekly weigh-ins with studio staff. Detailed records were kept, and if a star gained even a few pounds beyond the weight stipulated in their contract, they were quickly given a stern warning. If the weight remained, the penalties escalated, leading to immediate suspension without pay. This meant weeks or months of lost income, a powerful incentive to comply with even the most restrictive dietary practices. The focus on female stars was particularly relentless. The camera, it was argued, added 10 pounds, and therefore actresses had to appear unnaturally slender to look merely normal on screen. This led to dangerous habits. Studios prescribed diet pills and forced their actresses onto grueling, sometimes medically unsound, calorie-restricted plans. The pressure to conform fostered a culture of profound anxiety and self-criticism. The humiliation of the scale wasn't restricted to actresses. For male stars like Spencer Tracy or Humphrey Bogart, a single weigh-in was leverage the studio used to crush any sign of insubordination. Even male stars were not exempt from this scrutiny. If an actor's appearance began to suggest a lack of discipline, it could be used by the studio as leverage in contract disputes or cast him out of roles requiring physical prowess. The scale became a symbol of the star's servitude. It wasn't about wellness. It was about the studio's control over their public image. The studio felt entitled to manage every contour and curve because they believed the fantasy they sold, the romance, the glamour, the perpetual availability, dependent on physical perfection. The resulting personal struggles were immense, forcing stars to prioritize the studio's financial demands over their own well-being. The tyranny of the scale was just one manifestation of the complete ownership the studios asserted over their talent. Next, we explore the legal bonds of the contract jail, the iron grip of the 7-year deal that reduced Hollywood's greatest talents to mere property on a corporate ledger. The contract jail, the iron grip of the 7-year deal. My contract runs 6 days a week. It doesn't say anything about Sunday. Stars signed away their lives, their choices, and their time in contracts that often lasted 7 years, with the studio holding an option to renew every 6 months. This was the contract jail that legally bound actors, turning them into mere studio property. The 7-year contract was the foundation of the Golden Age studio system, a document more restrictive than any iron bars. For aspiring stars like Joan Crawford, Humphrey Bogart, and James Stewart, signing that first contract felt like winning the lottery. In reality, it was a profound surrender of personal and professional freedom. The studio system operated vertically, controlling every aspect of the filmmaking process, and their talent contracts reflected that absolute control. The system was structured to favor the studio completely. The star signed for 1 year, but the studio held the option, every 6 months, to renew for up to 7 years. If the star became a massive success, the studio was obligated only to pay the initially agreed-upon salary, regardless of how much money the star's films were earning at the box office. For a struggling ingenue who signed for $100 a week, a 7-year commitment meant she was perpetually underpaid, even as her stardom soared, while the studio reaped millions. Furthermore, the studio dictated every professional move. They chose the roles, the directors, and the co-stars. A star could be, and often was, punished for rejecting a role by being suspended without pay. Since the studio could simply extend the contract for the duration of the suspension, the actor remained financially bound but unable to work elsewhere, effectively trapping them in a gilded cage. This financial pressure was immense. This wasn't just about money, it was about absolute authority. One legendary actor, Burt Lancaster, described the crushing feeling not as wealth, but as the daily, palpable realization of being owned. The power of the contract extended far beyond the studio gates. It reinforced the rules of conduct we have already explored: the mandatory mates, the weight watching, and the moral policing. The studio had the absolute legal right to demand compliance, backed by the implicit threat that breaking any rule, no matter how trivial, could lead to suspension and an extended term in the contract jail. Breaking the 7-year cycle, or the option clause within it, was nearly impossible. Requiring lengthy, expensive legal battles few actors could afford to wage. This system reduced the complex humanity of an artist to a simple financial equation. The stars were cogs in a magnificent machine, cherished for their output, but strictly controlled to prevent them from seizing the wealth and independence their own talent generated. The studios might have legally owned their talent, but they also needed to protect their image by managing even the most delicate private matters. Next, we look at the lengths studios went to in enforcing the silent separation, orchestrating their stars' divorces with the same meticulous care they used to film their lavish romances. The political purity test, the Red Scare career killer. There is nothing funny about being serious. When the shadow of McCarthyism fell over Hollywood, the studios, desperate to appear patriotic, enforced an insidious rule: prove your loyalty or lose your livelihood. This was the unwritten rule of political conformity that irrevocably shattered the careers of artists and writers. The political purity test, the Red Scare career killer, was perhaps the most frightening of all the secret rules, for it had the power to instantly erase a professional life based purely on suspicion and fear. In the 1940s and 50s, as the chill of the Cold War settled over the nation, Hollywood became a prime target of government scrutiny. The studios, eager to protect their financial interests, readily complied, turning their own employees over to a campaign of blacklisting. The rule was simple: if you were called before the House Un-American Activities Committee, or HUAC, you had two choices. You could cooperate, naming friends and colleagues you suspected of having communist sympathies, or you could refuse. Refusal, on the grounds of either innocence or principle, was considered automatic proof of guilt. For figures like the gifted screenwriter Dalton Trumbo, the price of defiance was total professional exclusion. After being subpoenaed, Trumbo was among a group of writers and directors known as the Hollywood 10, who refused to answer the committee's questions. They were subsequently removed from their roles and jailed for contempt of Congress. Upon their release, they found their names had been placed on an informal but utterly effective blacklist, a secret list circulated among all the major studios. This blacklisting was a career destruction sentence. Trumbo, one of the era's most successful writers, could no longer use his own name. To earn a living for his family, he was forced to write under pseudonyms, often selling his brilliant scripts for a fraction of their worth to producers willing to risk using blacklisted talent in secret. His Academy Award-winning screenplay for The Brave One was attributed to a colleague, a humiliating but necessary deception. Even the beloved Charlie Chaplin, though never formally subpoenaed by HUAC, became a victim of the era's pervasive political toxicity. The government, suspicious of his liberal views, revoked his re-entry permit while he was traveling abroad. The silent film icon was exiled from the United States, his reputation and career in the country irrevocably ruined by political forces. This was one of the three rules that demonstrably ended careers. It did not require a public misdeed or a breach of the morality clause. It required only suspicion and a refusal to betray one's colleagues. It was a rule enforced not by a studio memo, but by the chilling consensus of an industry terrified of political reprisal. The political purge cost the industry some of its most talented voices. The blacklisting was a profound loss to cinema, an egregious overreach of control. While political purity was demanded, the studios maintained another, equally impossible, expectation: that their stars should never show the slightest signs of human fragility. Next, we explore the devastating demands of the No Visible Aging Edict, where a star's advancing years were treated as a financial liability. If you're enjoying this deep dive into Hollywood history, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss our next untold story from the Golden Age. The No Visible Aging Edict, the perpetual youth trap. I believe in the impossible. The camera required eternal youth, and studios demanded it. For actresses especially, the pressure to appear ageless was relentless, leading to drastic measures and the denial of the simple human right to grow older on screen. The No Visible Aging Edict was the industry's most unforgiving rule, particularly for its leading ladies. A star's box office value was intrinsically linked to their freshness, their availability, and the illusion of perpetual youth they projected. The camera, an uncompromising judge, treated any visible sign of passing years as a financial liability by studio executives. This rule created an environment of profound anxiety. Actresses such as Bette Davis, Marlene Dietrich, and Greta Garbo found themselves constantly battling time. Their contracts often contained unspoken clauses dictating that they must do everything possible to maintain their youthful appearance. The consequences for non-compliance were simple. The quality of their roles would diminish. Their contracts would not be renewed, or they would be subjected to long, involuntary hiatuses, a quiet professional ending. To combat the visible effects of age, the studios implemented elaborate and costly measures. Lighting technicians were given precise instructions to use only soft lighting and gauze filters to diffuse facial lines and shadows. Actresses were photographed and filmed from specific, flattering angles. These techniques, while creating beautiful cinematic images, were a constant reminder to the stars that their natural appearance was flawed. When these subtle methods no longer sufficed, the demands grew more severe. Actresses were expected to undergo constant cosmetic procedures, maintain rigorous, sometimes unhealthy, beauty regimens, and were even mandated to take vacations designed to allow them to discreetly recover from various procedures or simply stay out of the public eye until they could reappear with a revitalized glow. The time off, of course, was generally unpaid, yet another financial leverage point for the studio. The irony was that while these stars were capable of delivering performances of profound emotional depth and maturity, the system prioritized their superficial youth over their demonstrated talent. For an actress who had dedicated her life to her craft, being told that her value was decreasing simply because of the calendar was a devastating blow. Many actresses spoke later of the quiet despair of knowing that their careers were on a predetermined, swiftly declining clock. Ultimately, this edict forced these magnificent women to exist in a state of arrested development, forever trapped in the impossible fantasy of the audience's expectation. If you're enjoying this deep dive into Hollywood history, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss our next untold story from the Golden Age. The denial of aging was just one way the studios suppressed a star's humanity. Next, we delve into the constant demands that turned a star's private life into a public spectacle, exploring the exhausting reality of the smile and sign rule. The smile and sign rule, public appearances as obligations. I'm all for the single standard. Let men live up to ours. Every premiere, every benefit dinner, and every autograph session was mandatory. A star's time was not their own. They were perpetually on the clock, required to maintain their persona and charmingly fulfill every public obligation the studio deemed necessary. The smile and sign rule, public appearances as obligations, was the exhausting, unwritten law that dictated a star's life outside the studio gates. For performers like Marilyn Monroe, Gary Cooper, and Elizabeth Taylor, their persona was a precious, fragile commodity, and the studio required constant public maintenance of that image. The demand was simple. You must always be available, always be charming, and always reinforce the public's belief in the fantasy you represent. This rule meant that a star's contract included countless hours of mandatory promotional work. They were required to attend every premiere for their films, regardless of their personal schedule or exhaustion. They were dispatched on grueling cross-country publicity tours, stopping in dozens of cities for radio interviews, press conferences, and hours-long autograph signings. This was done to whip up enthusiasm for a new picture and to connect the star directly with the ticket-buying public. For many, this relentless schedule was a profound invasion of privacy. A star could never truly turn off their performance. Even a simple trip to the grocery store was subject to scrutiny, with studio publicists often arranging candid photographs to ensure the star was seen in an appropriate, wholesome, or glamorous context. Joan Crawford was a master of this, maintaining an impeccable facade of polished elegance whenever she was in the public eye. The burden of constant performance led to profound fatigue and, at times, public rebellion. The actress Greta Garbo, famous for her elusive nature and her desire to be alone, fought tirelessly against the demands of promotional work, understanding early on that constant exposure cheapened her mystique. Yet, even her reluctance was often interpreted as part of her brand. The most challenging aspect was the compulsory attendance at charity and war bond events. While many did so with genuine patriotism, the expectation was mandatory, turning acts of genuine goodwill into contractual obligations. Any refusal was deemed unpatriotic and a violation of the star's duty to the studio and the public. This rule stripped the stars of their precious personal time and peace, reducing them to perpetual performers whose existence was dedicated to maintaining the financial health of the studio system. They were never truly off the clock. They were always selling. The loss of autonomy was overwhelming, but the studio's control went even deeper, dictating the very way a star expressed themselves. Next, we journey into the sound stages to uncover the demands of the voice transformation, where the natural voice of an actor was deemed unacceptable and had to be completely re-engineered. The voice transformation, erasing the accent of the past. A good laugh is sunshine in a house. For many stars, the voice they were born with wasn't deemed suitable for the sophisticated tones of talkies. The studios enforced rigorous and often painful elocution lessons to erase regional accents and create a uniform Hollywood speaking voice. The abrupt transition from silent films to sound pictures in the late 1920s caused panic across Hollywood. Overnight, an actor's worth was no longer judged solely on their expressive face, but on the quality and projection of their voice. This gave rise to the voice transformation, an intense, mandatory rule enforced by the studios to ensure their stars sounded as glamorous as they looked. Many actors, including Gary Cooper and Clark Gable, hailed from humble or regional backgrounds. Their natural speech colored by accents, Midwestern drawls, thick Brooklyn tones, or rough theatrical projections ill-suited to the close microphone. The studio executives insisted on a standardized, polished manner of speech known as Mid-Atlantic or Transatlantic English, a cultivated blend of American and British accents that sounded sophisticated, educated, and placeless. This accent was considered the hallmark of cinematic elegance. To achieve this transformation, studios hired specialized voice coaches who implemented intense daily lessons. These sessions involved grueling exercises designed to retrain vocal cords and reshape pronunciation. For actors like Barbara Stanwyck, who possessed a strong, working-class Brooklyn accent, the process was a battle against her own history. Her dedication to this difficult task ultimately saved her career, which had been threatened by her initial struggle with sound. The control over voice was not just about accent. It was about projection and tone. The studios demanded that male stars maintain a deep, authoritative register, while female stars needed voices that were breathy and alluring. Stars who couldn't conform often saw their careers flounder, regardless of their silent film fame. The psychological impact of the voice transformation was immense. Like the forced name changes, this rule asked actors to sacrifice a fundamental part of their identity, the very sound of their genuine self, in the pursuit of stardom. It reinforced the studio's belief that they could engineer every aspect of a talent's appeal. The transformation was necessary for the continuation of their career. This level of comprehensive control over the stars' public and physical selves was absolute. Yet the studio's control went even further, extending into the realm of total secrecy. Next, we reveal the dark machinery of the Keep Your Secrets rule, detailing the vast network of employees sworn to silence by the studio system. The Keep Your Secrets rule. Confidentiality over everything. I was always observing, always learning. Studio employees, from drivers to hairdressers, were often forced to sign non-disclosure agreements that guaranteed their silence. The inner workings, scandals, and true personalities of the stars were guarded by a formidable wall of contracted confidentiality. This was the Keep Your Secrets rule. Confidentiality over everything, the essential mechanism that kept the Golden Age fantasy intact. The moment a star, such as Humphrey Bogart, Marilyn Monroe, or Bette Davis, stepped off the soundstage, they entered a world managed by a cadre of trusted, but contractually bound, support staff. These employees, cooks, chauffeurs, personal assistants, and even the studio doctors, were the unwitting custodians of Hollywood's deepest truths. The contracts signed by these staff members were ironclad and intentionally intimidating. They often included stiff financial penalties for any disclosure of private information, guaranteeing silence over everything from a star's excessive drinking to a hidden romantic partner. This system was designed to ensure that the secrets remained internal, managed only by the studio's powerful publicity and fixing departments. The role of the studio fixer was central to this rule's enforcement. They operated by applying financial pressure, invoking the morality clause, and, most importantly, by relying on the network of silent staff. If a star, say Robert Mitchum, was involved in a situation that could compromise his public image, the fixer would manage the entire cleanup, paying off any witnesses, all while the star's personal staff watched in silence. The rule created a climate of profound isolation for the stars. They could truly trust no one, knowing that those closest to them were obligated to the studio first. This reality forced many stars to become guarded and reserved, building emotional barriers to protect their true selves from contractual exposure. Greta Garbo's famous reclusiveness was certainly intensified by the constant knowledge that every member of her household was a potential spy for the studio. For the studios, this control was about protecting millions of dollars in investment. A star's private flaw was a direct threat to the perfect, unassailable image that sold tickets. The confidentiality contracts were therefore deemed essential to the system's survival, functioning as an invisible moat around the star's personal life. The system of mandated secrecy was effective, but one famous actress dared to challenge the entire structure, setting the stage for a dramatic showdown that risked her whole career. Next, we confront the no freelance mandate, the rule against insubordination that drove one of the Golden Age's greatest legends into a monumental court battle. If you know someone who loves old Hollywood as much as you do, share this video with them. History this fascinating deserves to be seen. The No Freelance Mandate, the studio versus Bette Davis. The best time I ever had with a movie was working for myself. When a star dared to seek freedom outside their contract by taking roles with rival studios or attempting to launch independent careers, the retaliation was swift, brutal, and often career-defining. This was the rule against insubordination, and it led to some of the greatest legal battles in cinema history. The no freelance mandate was the studio's final defense against the erosion of their power. Under the 7-year contract system, a star was exclusive property. The idea that a highly bankable talent might work for a competitor was anathema to the all-powerful studio heads. Any attempt to break this rule was met with an immediate all-out war designed to destroy the star's professional standing. The most famous confrontation over this issue involved the legendary, fiery-tempered Bette Davis and her home studio, Warner Brothers. Davis was deeply frustrated by the inferior scripts she was constantly assigned. Tired of being cast in trivial roles, Davis took the unthinkable step in 1936. She rejected a project and left for England, intending to work as a freelance actress. Warner Brothers, led by the formidable Jack Warner, was furious. They immediately invoked her contract, declaring her in breach and suing her to prevent her from working for anyone else. Davis fought back, taking the studio to court in Britain in a landmark case. She argued that the contract was an unlawful restraint of trade, essentially a form of indentured servitude. The stakes were immense. If Davis won, it would dismantle the entire studio system. However, she ultimately lost the case. The British court ruled that while the contract was restrictive, Davis had received substantial financial benefit and had agreed to the terms. She was forced to return to Hollywood, financially depleted and professionally humiliated, to fulfill the remainder of her Warner Brothers contract. Though she lost the battle, Davis's defiance was a pivotal moment. Her principled stand eventually led to changes in contract terms for subsequent generations of stars. Later, Olivia de Havilland would wage a separate, successful legal campaign to challenge the 7-year contract in the 1940s, directly leading to the de Havilland Law. But it was Davis who risked it all first. The no freelance mandate was one of the 3 rules that demonstrably ended careers, not always by firing the star, but by financially crippling them and making them untouchable by any other employer. The message was clear. In old Hollywood, obedience was rewarded, and independence was professionally removed. The studio's perception of their stars as mere assets was absolute. Next, we delve into the property rule, the humiliating practice of buying, selling, and loaning out the biggest names in cinema. The conceal your sexuality mandate, the rule that crushed identities. I've learned that you can't have everything and reach your goal. In a time when the public demanded heteronormativity, studios forced countless non-heterosexual stars to live secret, devastating double lives. This rule ensured their private identities never tainted their public appeal, a burden that cost many their careers, happiness, and peace. This was the chilling, unofficial mandate of the Conceal Your Sexuality mandate, the rule that crushed identities. For the studios of the Golden Age, stars were romantic ideals, and any hint of a non-traditional romantic life was considered a financial poison. The rule was understood by everyone, from the lowliest extra to the biggest box office draws, like Rock Hudson, Cary Grant, and Marlene Dietrich. The system required the public to believe that the on-screen romance was real. The consequence of defying this expectation was not merely a loss of a role, but the swift ending of an entire professional life. This made the Conceal Your Sexuality mandate one of the 3 rules that demonstrably ended careers. The enforcement was meticulous, managed largely by powerful agents and the studio publicity departments. The most famous example of this intricate deception was the life of the handsome and immensely popular Rock Hudson. As his stardom soared in the 1950s, so did the persistent rumors about his private life. To safeguard their multi-million-dollar investment, Universal Studios and his agent, Henry Wilson, arranged a sham marriage to Wilson's secretary, Phyllis Gates. The marriage was a publicist's dream, a picture-perfect couple confirming the star's straight image, but a private heartache for all involved, as it forced a talented man to deny his true identity for the sake of his career. For Hudson and others, this mandate demanded a profound, lifelong deception. They were forced to attend parties with fabricated partners, carefully manage their interactions, and cultivate a public narrative that was utterly divorced from their authentic selves. The constant threat of exposure created a devastating psychological toll, forcing these individuals into a suffocating existence of fear and self-denial. Even stars who did not marry under duress, such as the elusive Greta Garbo, were constantly monitored. Her private life was guarded by a wall of intense secrecy to maintain her mysterious, yet ultimately romantically accessible, on-screen persona. The studios were vigilant, deploying their network of fixers to ensure that any photographic evidence or revealing testimony never reached the public eye. This pervasive fear of being exposed fundamentally destroyed the emotional lives of these stars. The system insisted that their private identity was a threat to the public good, compelling them to choose between their truth and their profession. The choice, driven by financial necessity and professional ambition, led to decades of hidden lives and untold personal hardship. The heartbreaking compliance with this rule demonstrated the final, total control the studio system held over the lives of its talent. Yet, the history of the Golden Age is also one of defiance. Next, we close our chapter with the ultimate rebellion, the final curtain, breaking the rule of silence, exploring how a few courageous stars found the strength to speak out against the machine that tried to own them. The final curtain, breaking the rule of silence. I'm glad I don't have to live up to my reputation. For all the secrecy and control the studios enforced, a few stars eventually found a way to speak out against the system that owned them. Their final defiance, years later, was a refusal to keep silent about the machine that once controlled their every move. The final curtain, breaking the rule of silence, represents the ultimate triumph of the artist over the system. For decades, the studio contract, backed by the pervasive unwritten rules, ensured total compliance. But as the 1950s drew to a close and the studio system began its slow, inevitable collapse, the iron grip loosened, allowing a select few of the era's biggest legends to finally tell their own stories. One of the most profound examples of this defiance came from the magnificent Olivia de Havilland. Her legal battle against Warner Brothers in the 1940s was a crucial, though difficult, first step. She fought the studio's right to suspend her and extend her contract beyond the initial 7 years. While the battle cost her 4 years of her prime career, her eventual victory in 1944 led to the landmark de Havilland Law, which severely limited the studio's ability to indefinitely hold an actor. Her triumph was a watershed moment, finally offering a pathway to professional freedom for her contemporaries and those who followed. Another powerful voice of reckoning was that of Shirley Temple, the most famous child star in history. Upon reaching adulthood, she began to speak with candor about the psychological manipulation and relentless pressure of her childhood career. Her accounts revealed the intense control exerted over her as a child, stripping away the sugary myth of her early years and replacing it with the complex, difficult truth of her professional life. Her testimony was a powerful indictment of the child labor and emotional control central to the studio machine. Even the glamorous Joan Crawford, in her later years, provided glimpses into the relentless pressure to maintain an impossible image, and the battles fought against the studio bosses who dictated everything from her hair to her relationships. Her willingness to talk about the system's power exposed the human cost of the glamour. These revelations were profound because they were not made for profit, but for truth. They were the authentic voices of individuals who had finally secured their liberty. Their stories provided invaluable context for historians and a vital human element for fans, confirming the difficult reality behind the shimmering facade of the Golden Age. Ultimately, the defiance of these stars cemented their true legacy, not merely as talented performers, but as courageous pioneers who fought for artistic and personal autonomy. The passing of the studio system itself was the final act of liberation, allowing these secret rules to finally be relegated to history. The passing of the studio system itself was the final act of liberation, allowing these secret rules to finally be relegated to history. If you were shocked by these iron laws, subscribe now to keep the golden memories alive. Share this video with another classic film lover, and tell us in the comments below which rule you found the most devastating.